I say that there's three 20-year segments in an adult life. Where from 20 to 40 is learning, 40 to 60 is leveraging, and 60 beyond is leaving. And I mean, at this point, you should become the portrait of the desired destination in which your children and grandchildren should arrive. And I don't mean a picture of perfection, a picture of grace, quick to forgive, quick to ask for forgiveness. And I think that becomes incredibly attractive to your grandchildren, especially, and to your children.
You're listening to the Wisdom for Wealth for Life podcast, brought to you by Blue Trust. Welcome to the Seasons of Money and Marriage series. Part 3 of the series is Empty Nesters. On this panel, we have Karen and Crawford Loritts and Julie and Russ Crosson, hosted by Blue Trust Senior Financial Advisor, Marshall Potter. This discussion is all about transitional periods and how to best guide your children from afar while growing closer with your spouse. Get your notepads and pens ready. This one is loaded with great insight and advice. Let's listen in now.
Welcome, listeners, to our third session in Seasons of Marriage and Money. Today we're going to be talking about transitions and the season of empty nesting. So a lot going on in that stage. Today we're excited to be sharing with you. We have two couples with a lot of wisdom in the empty nesting stage. Crawford and Karen Loritts, thank you for joining us. Russ and Julie Crosson, welcome. Thank you for being with us. I would love to have our audience get to know you a little bit. So let me start off and have you tell us a little bit about your family and how many years you've been married.
Well, you want me to start off?
Yes, that's great, Julie.
We've been married 45.
We're in the 45th year.
45 years, and we have three boys, and we have one turning 40 this year, so 40, 38, and 35. And they're all married. We have 10 grandchildren, with one in heaven. One was born with a heart defect. So but McKenna, we all know where she is. So anyway, we stay busy. We've got 6 are here and 3 are in Huntsville.
So fairly close by.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Crawford, Karen?
We've been married 53 years.
Wow.
Yeah, we've got 4 adult children. I'll let you tell the ages.
Right. Oh, me? Okay. Our oldest son is 51. We'll tell the names. 51, 47, 43, and then 40-year-old. In about a couple more days, she'll be 40. And then we have 11 grandchildren, 6 grandsons and 5 granddaughters from age 23 down to age 7. And they live in 3 different states, 2 in Michigan, Tennessee, and North Carolina. So,
none in Georgia.
Yeah, none in Georgia. They left and went away.
Yes.
So life is very full.
Yes.
Very full, very fun too.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So let's think back to the empty nesting stage. You're at that point where the kids are getting older and you're beginning to figure out, you're in the midst of trying to figure out this transition process. Kids are behaving differently. You're doing some of the natural things that they're kind of, pulling in their own direction. Talk a little bit about what that was like for you in terms of engaging with your kids. How did you handle that process?
Well, I'll start. This is a horrible story, but when we dropped off our number 4, our last child, to college, everything was great. I was preparing for this empty nest. We're going to do things together. We're going to have the kids, they're away and married and do summer in college. But I had an emotional meltdown. My identity had walked out of the door. And I had to regroup. And so that was an interesting time for me to embrace this empty nest. So it was a time of trying and time of transitioning, not only with us as a couple, but
I was totally blindsided by her meltdown because she's very independent and so am I, and we've raised our kids to be very independent. And so I had this vision of, they're gone, God bless them, we're on to the next thing. Let's get it going. But we had to work through some things.
Had to work through some things and pray through some things, and had some good friends just to come alongside of me and help me. That this emptiness, it's going to be okay.
Yeah, I love that you guys, acknowledge that's normal part of the process, and you're able to prayerfully approach it, take some time, get some friends involved in that process. How long would you say that took kind of overall before you guys felt you had some clarity on that?
Well, it was that month of I'll never forget that month of October, and then towards near Thanksgiving, I was coming out of it. It was just not a great big thing, but it was just me as my identity. My kids were gone, and what do I do now? And we had anticipated some of this, making sure we had date nights, whereas I didn't talk about the kids before they all left. But it was an interesting transition. So it just took me a month and a half, and went away with some girlfriends, and they sort of helped me because they were empty nesters too.
It wasn't long, but it was real.
Yeah, it really was.
And,
It really
and
was.
it just, but we got past it.
Yeah, we got past it.
And I love that you had some folks that were a little bit further down the road you could lean
Yes,
into.
Yeah.
right. But
That's really
I thought I
wise.
was prepared,
Yeah.
but I really wasn't prepared until it actually happened.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
And that, I think that's okay, right? I mean, we know it's coming, but there is nothing like
right.
walking
right,
through it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Russ, Julie, how about
Yeah,
yourselves?
so I thought I would deal with this by going on a 6-week road trip in a convertible with Julie to go see all the Ron Blue offices. So I thought, okay, last one walks out the door, and we get in the car to take off around the country. And I think I distracted her from what Karen experienced for at least 6 weeks, but I wasn't prepared when they all came home for Christmas. And then they left.
Yeah.
And then that's when it kind of hit, So I wasn't ready for that. The 6-week road trip distracted her and it helped us through that initial time, but then it was very real when we realized when they came over at Christmas, they all left again. It's like I didn't have a big road trip planned in January. So
Well, and I would say too that by the time they left, the last one leaves, you're really enjoying them. You finally get them to where you enjoy them. They're delightful. You enjoy them. You enjoy their friends, and all of a sudden they leave, and it's like, wait a minute, I just got to where I wanted to be.
just where you liked them.
And so it did. Once they came home for Christmas and then they left, it's a grieving time. You grieve that season that's over, and you miss them, and yet you know that you have to launch them, and so you can't lean on them. And so that's when you start we start having discussions about what does God want us to do with this next season of life.
Yeah.
That's good.
But Russ, you said something though that I think is so significant. We should not try to think that our spouse is going to experience it the same way we do, or at the same time.
Right. Yeah.
But it's okay, and not to try to over orchestrate it to respond and not react. And that's what I had to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that empathy to walk with your spouse and let them
Yes.
walk at their own pace.
Well, and I did have an older lady came to me and said, "How are you doing?" I said, "This is really hard. I'm struggling." She said, "Oh, it's hard at first, but then it's really fun."
Yeah.
So that helped.
Yeah.
That is cool.
Having those people to speak into their past
Yes.
there and help
They
you.
know
It's really
they've been
important.
through that. Yeah.
Not to have the pride that I'm not going to share it with anybody. That's
Right.
not-
Mm-mm.
Well, and I think we got to remember we're raising them to launch them, and let God have them have the ministry that He's called them to do. And so we don't want to hold on to them. And so letting go is hard, but it's the right thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Now, you said it, they got to be pleasant. You were working through this parenting process.
Yes.
Expand on that. What did that dynamic look like of getting to that point, relationally interacting with them? Because at some point we're kind of more directing where our kids are going and how they're acting and boundaries, and then we're shifting our relationship with them to be more walking alongside and sometimes consulting, and sometimes they ask and sometimes they don't.
Right.
How did that play out for you, different personalities?
Well, all three were boys, so mine's a little bit different. But what we realized was that in high school we need to start letting go. So, so that's why we just did a lot of fun stuff. Take the boys out and a whole carload of kids up and go skiing and tubing and just kind of enjoying the conversations that they had. And they played paintball and did a lot of stuff that I just kind of was taking pictures, kind of staying so I could hear the conversations, but not really involved. But then, was it their senior year?
Yeah. So the senior year, we took off the curfew except when they were on a date.
Okay.
And some of the other parents are like, "What the heck? What did the Crossons do?" We thought in 9 months, we're not going to know what they're doing.
They'll be gone.
So we thought, senior year, and so of course they tried to stay out all night a couple times, do all this, and they realized that wasn't any fun because none of their friends were staying out all night. And so
They didn't like it at all. We told them, you can stay out all night. We don't care.
Yeah.
Just let us know where you think you're going to be, because we don't, if we get woken up. So, the first one stays out all night till 4, comes home and goes, never doing that again. It's boring. Nobody, everybody falls asleep. It's boring. I'm not doing that again. So then the second one tried it. Same thing. This is no fun. And then you don't feel good the next day. So they learned before they went
But I
to college.
think Marshall, maybe the word you're looking for in these transitions, you go from commanding them to now counseling them, then you're eventually going to be peers with them as they leave. It's sloppy.
Yeah.
Because you you've been telling them stuff. Well, now you maybe shouldn't tell them stuff. Right. And so you have to ask for forgiveness a lot of times because you just don't know. Nobody gave you a manual on how to do this.
Yeah.
Hey, you go to this and now you just do this. So for us, it was sloppy. Many times I had to ask the boys for forgiveness because I'd be overbearing. I'd still be doing the commanding stuff when I should have just moved into a counseling or listening role. And you know me pretty well. That's kind of hard for me to not have an opinion on things. So sloppy is the transition time. But yeah, we take off the curfew because we knew that when they went off to college, we were pretty much done.
Yeah.
And so they might as well get started a year early. And so
I love that idea of humility that you were pointing to too, though, just that idea of apologies and having that open conversation. I think a lot of times it's buried and we aren't acknowledging, but we can bring it up above the table and say, we're trying to launch you. We're trying to let you make more decisions and acknowledge that you're in this for the first time too. I imagine that was received well as you were having this conversation.
Yeah, my son comes in and says, God told me to sell the motorcycle. And I says, great, you're listening to God. And but I have to sell it in 5 days. Well, I'm like, well, what if it doesn't sell? So it was really neat. Guy came with cash in the very last hour of the last day he had set out as a fleece. So I learned some stuff from him.
Wow.
Yeah. But I'm still trying to control it. Right. You're still trying to if God told you, shouldn't you really sell it? What's this 5-day deal? But it's good communication is important during that time, but sloppy. The key word is sloppy.
Yes, absolutely.
I would say with Crawford did a better job with the children, helping us to transition into coaching them through. But I was raised by a single parent, and everything was very authoritarian. Just one side of the conversation, and so I just had rules, and just trying to micromanage their life.
Yeah.
And my husband had to remind me we have to entrust what we're teaching them a respect and responsibility to letting them go to do things. It's not on your list, Karen. And that stuff can be hard, so he just helped me as my better partner to help with our children, to letting them go. If they're going to be okay, Karen, because we've entrusted them with rules and guides and things like that, and it's going to be all right. So I had to bite my tongue lots of times.
Yeah, but I think there's a principle involved here. Just looking back in the rearview mirror, sometimes you wish you knew then what you know now. Yeah. And but that's the reason why you have grandkids, right? You can. So looking back in the rearview mirror, I think that the challenge of parenting is that you have to embrace change. You have to embrace change. That you can't, if you're going to raise healthy kids, you can't continue to relate to them the same way that you want to relate to them. And Russ and I probably have similar personalities. The easiest thing to do is say, hey, no, that's, don't you understand about, no, let's get on to the next thing. But that's not gonna work. You raise your kids to walk toward God and to walk out your door from the time they're born. So that's a hard thing, but what's the alternative?
Yeah, you don't want them walking back in.
That's right.
Emotionally crippled.
That's right.
Yes.
Emotionally crippled.
And that's the alternative. And so that means that that means you have to adjust, you have to change, because this is so morbid to say this, we're going to be very dead one day. And you don't want to develop hyper-dependent children.
Right.
Yeah.
But I would say in one of those transitions, one of the things I learned, because I said no to motorcycles. I was a nurse anesthetist until I quit to raise my kids. And I've been in too many orthopedic and neuro rooms. And so no motorcycles. You're not going to, I gave them great reasons why. And that's why we're not doing it. I know it's fun. As soon as they got out, 2 of them bought motorcycles. They weren't listening. So then I have no recourse except to pray. Because only God can take care of them. They're on their own. I'm not going to micromanage them then.
Yeah, mom's not going to go down to college and harp at them to get rid of the motorcycle.
So I had to switch to counsel if they asked. And they already knew what I thought.
Right. So praying. Love that. This stage probably drives that more than anything. Yeah. Talk about the teaching side or the spiritual side. Crawford, you mentioned principles, but you're not, I feel like, again, there's this phase of teaching directly the word, but now you're not in relationship as often. How are you still bringing God's word into the conversation as you're maybe getting less direct time and maybe teaching less directly with your kids? How did you all handle that?
Well, I think that you reach a point where you realize, and I love Russ's progression there. you reach a point where, I say that there's 3 20-year segments in an adult life, where from 20 to 40 is learning, 40 to 60 is leveraging, and 60 beyond is leaving. And I mean, at this point, you should become the portrait of the desired destination in which your children and grandchildren should arrive. And so your major impact is modeling, being that picture, and I don't mean a picture of perfection, a picture of grace, quick to forgive, quick to ask for forgiveness. And I think that becomes incredibly attractive to your grandchildren, especially, and to your children, where, the wise thing you did, that's hard to do, where your kid buys a motorcycle when they're gone, and they know how you feel about that, and yet you're not going to drip on them every time they're around, so you have to adjust. Yeah. And so I think that's the movement that we need to embrace.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's good.
I think embodiment.
One thing I wish I would have done sooner is you're used to telling them stuff to do. You're trying to bring biblical principles and train them. But I wish I would have more quickly said, what do you think God thinks about this? And got them dealing with God being vertical rather than me. So if I could say anything that we should have done sooner was, well, what do you think? How do you think God feels about that music? Or what do you think God has to say about that relationship? I jump in and tell them what I thought about it. Well, it doesn't really, And so I think this idea of values is the sooner we can get them interacting with their Heavenly Father and getting His input as to what they should do, I should have done that sooner. It would have taken a lot of stress off of me because I was trying to train them, teach them, tell them stuff. And yet, if I had just said, how do you think God thinks about that?
Now, how did you react when you asked that question and they did something you were like, that's not what God thinks?
Well, it's interesting. No, it's interesting. It's interesting.
Just ask the question.
Just ask the question. My job was to ask
alone.
the question. I wish I would have sooner said, what's the Bible say about that? Or how would God think about whatever it is rather than me jumping in? I wish I would have done that sooner.
But I would also, back to your question, as they left, what we would do is look for teachable moments because they're not listening usually. But if they're asking, like, I don't know what to do, or this happened, or what do you think? Our oldest son very rarely communicated with us. We would call him and try and find out what's going on in his life. But there was a point in time, I think he was a junior, he called us and said, I need help. This girl that he thought he loved had just left, and he was very teachable. So we had a chance to really talk to him about that God was taking care of him. We didn't see it, but that he could trust what God was doing. It was probably a protection. So that's what you do. You look for when they're looking for.
I think what Crawford said is absolutely critical here, and it's an old adage, but more's caught than taught. They're watching, and even though they don't act like they're seeing anything, they're not missing anything. That's as I look back in the rearview mirror, like you said, they didn't miss anything. I wish they would have missed some stuff, right? Yeah. But they didn't miss anything, and I think that's good and bad. They're watching. They're watching our interaction, and
it comes back up.
And now that we're down the road a little bit, we're watching. My oldest son says, "I can't believe it, Dad. I'm doing just the stuff you did."
Right.
It's like
Exactly.
Like, that's a bad thing.
One of the things we found helpful too, especially when they got to high school and they knew everything, we asked them to pick 3 or 4 godly people in the church that they looked up to be their spiritual mentors. And so every beginning of every school year, we have a little time with your spiritual mentors. What are their names? We can pray for them as you interact with them and give them your goals and things that you're working through. So not only a mom and dad, they're going to be like Mr. Fussell or whoever is going to check on you for all 4 of our children. And that helped out. So they'll hear the same thing that mom and dad are saying. Absolutely. But they had to, be responsible to their spiritual mentors. So that really helped out in high school.
Yeah, wisdom cries in the streets, Proverbs says. And, I had someone tell me this, 40 years ago. He said, experience is not always the best teacher, but it is the only school a fool will attend. And so his point was, early on in our parenting, I began to watch some of our friends, and I had this tendency too, this fear-based parenting that drives a little bit of hyper control, and you don't want your kid to be this, you don't want your kid to be that, you don't want them to be this, and the grocery list goes on. And finally, I got a little bit convicted about that early on with our oldest. By the time he was 6 or 7 years old, I began to realize that you're going to either raise a rebellious child or a reactionary child, but not a wholesome one. if all your decisions is driven by self-protection and fear. And so we began to shift a little bit, and we started this habit that the week before they would go back to school, we would take family vacation, and they would have to write out their goals for the year, what they were. And a lot of them had to do with character stuff. And so we would hold that up to them whenever they would go south and say, well, this is what you said. How you doing with that? You know, we wanted them to own their lives and not rescue them from consequences. Because the goal of parenting is to raise children who are independently dependent upon God.
Yes.
And we wanted them to be positive. And, you know, I mean, that there are little twists and turns along the way.
Yeah.
Always. But we realized that we had to raise our kids on our knees.
That's good. Yeah.
Oh,
And
yes.
I love the character piece you were drawing out and bringing it back to them. Obviously, as you're watching your kids, I'm sure you're seeing different personalities.
Yeah.
How did you draw that out? How did you speak blessing over them? How did you fight the fear and lean more into that?
Well, we have 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls, all except one. That one child has to, if I said the stove is hot, that child's going to still touch the stove. Everybody just trusts that mom said that stove is hot. And then there's another child that all you have to do is look at her, and she would just crumble when she disobeyed or something like that. The
Our
other
boys
ones-
only understood pain.
Yeah, so we just had to. But I was raised as a single. My mother was a single parent. Everything's the same, and you can't do that with all different children. We have principles, but you have to speak to that specific child and things like that. So that was a learning for me.
Yeah, I mean, you got 6 silver bullets and 24 targets. Okay, you can't shoot at everything. Yeah. You figure that out, and so with our kids and their development, I learned this from my dad. My father was an extremely wise person, and actually, we only got disciplined for really 3 big things. But there was no interaction if you did one of these 3 things. You had 3 Ds: dishonesty, flat out disobedience, and disrespect. Those were the deals. And he didn't have a whole lot of rules. So I kind of learned from him that, you can't be falling on your sword over every little thing that they do, else everybody's going to be sipping Maalox around the house. It's just and you're going to raise kids who are just paralyzed and fearful. Yeah. And so that's kind of how we had to do it, and we kind of different, and our different personalities work together. They call me a little bit more Grace.
And my son calls me Law.
Yeah.
He said that in a congregation, a lot of people. He says, "Well, Dad is Grace and Mom is Law." Well, I've had to write my kids and apologize for some of my boo-boos.
Well, I've had to write apologies too.
So I think that's God's sense of humor, giving us different personality in our kids, because, Julie and I have 3 boys. They're all totally different. The first one was just the sanguine, steady, and then the second one was the otter person. Maybe that's the sanguine.
Party. Everything's a party.
No, first one was phlegmatic. Second one was sanguine. Then the last one was our personality. Yeah. So God finally gave us one we kind of understood. But the second one, we read a book called Strong-Willed Child or Dreamer, and he had all 50 points of that, and we didn't understand any of them.
Of the dreamer. We thought he was strong-willed. He had the points of a dreamer.
Yeah, and we were like, no wonder we're not doing anything right. So I just think being students of your kids and adapting, like you said, they're different. And we, by having, God, why did you we waited until the third one to give us one that had our personality. We kind of understood him. First 2 was really a different challenge.
Yeah. It sounds like you both had some similar process in terms of obviously prayer, looking at their character, trying to have humble relationship.
Went to counseling.
Counseling.
We didn't understand our second son when I went and saw a counselor, and he gave us this book, The Strong-Willed Child or Dreamer. Like, oh, we had those 50 points, but we don't understand any of those. No wonder we're not like Jihad.
Absolutely. So I've heard a little bit of this, but I want to draw it out. So what was the goal, or what is the goal, you would say, of child launching at this phase? And did you explicitly communicate that with your kids? Were you communicating an explicit vision, or is that kind of something you were more internally processing?
Well, let's talk a little bit about the money side and launching the kids. We had a goal that, like I said, we took off their curfew their senior year, but we wanted them when they went off to college to know how to budget. That we'd given them a target to. We'd match them for a car if they got the Hope Scholarship, so they had to keep their grades up and work. So we created a work ethic. We had an intentional plan about that. So when they left, it was like, hey, all right, here's your amount for the, they had to earn their money for incidentals and food and football tickets and all those things, and live on a budget. And just, I know some parents are really concerned they got to deal it out monthly. We didn't want to do that. We wanted them to be prepared to, all right, we're going to handle this. And so when they walked out that door, we wanted them to They understood that we got to know how to budget, and we've seen that now translate 20 years later. But the work ethic was a big deal. This matching for a car was a good thing we put out there, and they had to get the Hope Scholarship. We didn't have to worry about grades because we wouldn't match them if they didn't keep their grades up to qualify for the Hope Scholarship, and they had to make some money to be matched.
I love that because you're connecting them to the real world.
Right.
You don't work, you don't eat.
Yeah, but we also had to put some limits because the older two were more willing to spend. The younger one didn't. So
and he got started earlier, so I didn't want him buying a Porsche. So I had to say, okay, we're limited.
He was as a junior saving like $15,000. We thought we are not buying him a $30,000 car, so we had to cap that about 10.
Yes. I love Chad.
You know him. Well, he just saw it. He got an earlier start than his brother. So, but
they tried to talk him into spending, wouldn't do it. Nope.
Right. Yeah, I like that too. When our kids were in elementary school, in fact, when they turned 11 that summer it was a time where they now had to make the family grocery budget, price it out, had to take them to the grocery store and show them how to navigate the grocery store, and then drop them off. They made the groceries, whatever they saved, they were able to keep. Sometimes we, sometimes
food.
we ate no brand food, but teaching, but teaching
Salt
them
and
how,
pepper on cardboard.
it was really nasty. But teaching them how to do a family budget, and here's the money you can have. And then when they got to be in college age, we said that you want to go to that college, that's fine, but this is only where mom and dad's money is, and we're not signing any student loans. Here's your scholarship, and so this is your choices. And so they picked the choices to do that because we wanted them to be good stewards of God's money. Because we were on staff with a ministry, and so we were really intentional in helping them to see our prayers in action based upon what God had given us and being good stewards of that.
I love it.
And I remember when they were in high school too, they worked at that summer, all of them worked summer, and whatever money they saved would be their clothing allowance for that school year. Some of them did quite well. We would match whatever the clothes to a certain amount. One of our children spent all the money, maybe instead of 10 items, that person had only 5 items and didn't have any money for the rest of the year. And so that's what they had to live on.
Yeah, there's a memorable story about that.
Memorable story about now you have to wear last year's clothes because you have to be a good steward of your money that you saved.
Yeah.
The money and mom and dad's going to double, and then you go out and blow it. So
they had to learn. I mean, I think
they had to learn. That was the only time that child did that.
And better than down
That's
the road.
right.
Yeah.
And I love, like, Russ, you're pointing them back to God with your question, well, what does God think? And you're pointing them back to God saying, you're stewarding God's money.
That's right.
This is not just us. This is not just the way our family does it, but there's a reason for this.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a story with this one child. I am a soft touch with our daughters, okay? It's like my boys, they say that we raised our youngest daughter, she's like our grandchild. That's the way they, so I'm a soft touch. With our boys, at any rate. But I came home and our oldest daughter, I don't think she minds us telling this story, our oldest daughter, that's who she's referring to, I had to take our youngest son to the mall to get him some type of sports stuff, cleats or something like that. So she heard we're going to the mall, and all of a sudden she goes, Dad, I don't have any clothes to wear. So I'm going, you don't have any clothes to wear? And so I'm going, well, okay, you want to...
She had blown all the money.
Yeah.
Okay.
That fact she had not mentioned in the conversation. So I said, well, come on, let's see what... And as the Lord would have it, Karen is driving up the driveway while we're walking. Where are you guys going? And I wish I had a camera to catch the body language. My daughter, and she said, no clothes. Okay. And then when Karen explained, I'm going, I think I've been hot water.
Lesson learned.
Yes, a good one. And
So
a good
Marshall, Karen mentioned the idea of no student loans, and we wrote a book
Yeah.
called Your Money Made Simple. We have a formula in there that talks about your living expenses and student loans are on the numerator, which means you have to make more money. So one of the best things we can do for our kids is, they need to live within their means and not come out with these, huge loans. So I think as parents, trying to help them realize, and I don't know about you, Crawford, when I look at resumes, I really start at the bottom. What activities are they involved in? What sports do they do? I finally get to where they went to college.
Yeah.
But that's really not the most important thing I'm looking for when I hire somebody. And so I think to handicap them by having them get out with
Yeah.
these huge numbers of student loans, and now they got to make X amount of money just to break even, you've kind of set them up on a bad trajectory.
And we decided no student loans. So we told them, if you want to go to a fancy school, you got to get a scholarship. No student loans. But if you live at home and go to Kennesaw and get the Hope Scholarship, it's free. So that's you can go. That's how we'll do it.
Yeah.
But otherwise, we've met with too many young couples where that's a huge problem.
Absolutely.
It's the student
Financially.
loans. And I think we do our kids a disservice when we incorrectly communicate to them or unintentionally communicate to them, that they got to get that certain place. So even to the extent of going into huge debt to have that on my, I graduated from here.
Yeah.
When you get out in the real world, you're looking for the character and the work ethic and the things that hopefully you've built into them as you've gone along.
Absolutely.
That's good, Karen. Yeah.
I love introducing the ownership for expenses and having them understand how much that costs. And obviously when we're raising them, we're covering a lot of their costs. Talk about the timeline of your transition with your kids. There was college, they're beginning to get scholarships or they're working or there's a certain amount you're covering. Did you ever have kids that kind of got beyond that point and then are coming back and saying, hey, I want to do this, and mom and dad, can you help me pay for something? And did you ever have to have an explicit conversation about, no, the mom and dad gravy train is wrapped up, we're done here, where you were kind of pushing them forward down that path? Or based on the work that you were doing, did they all kind of move forward just fine?
We've been really blessed and fortunate. I mean, our kids, they're hesitant to ask. And so if they ever ask, then we both know that this is, and we have one of our kids that went through a very difficult time, and even she's hesitant to ask. And but I think ownership begins early on. I mean, it begins very early. I think, when you give them an allowance or so, okay, or you go on vacation, you allocate a certain amount of money when they're kids, and if one spends it, and everybody else is going out to get ice cream, and they're sipping water, they learn a lesson. So I think I just think, and I tell couples this all the time, just because you can doesn't mean that you should.
Yeah.
And so I think, we've had to help some, and we've wanted to help them. Our youngest son was a church planter and was, and he is extraordinarily responsible. But, it's hard. And so, we were at a place where we could help him. And we've had to do that. But, and also, we sent a message, we're family. If you get to a place where of course we're here to do as much as we possibly can. But it's a great joy to know that they've proven that they take the initiative, that they're responsible, they're good stewards, and that kind of thing. So,
And I think that starts early, back in the high school days, if they have to buy gas for their car.
Yeah,
As you said, they go to the grocery store.
Yeah.
So, you teach them running real early, you get the allowance, spend, save, and give. You start building in these 3 bucket ideas, and then you just keep hammering that. And so hopefully when you launch them, they realize there's not unlimited resources for unlimited alternatives, okay? And the key to financial freedom is to spend less than I make and do it for a long time. And if they hear that long enough, I went and spoke at one of my son's colleges and said, how many of you want to be millionaires? And all the kids in the class raised their hand. So I'm going to tell you how to do it. It's real simple. just spend less than you make and do it for a long time. Like that wasn't what they wanted to hear, right? But it's not easy to do, but it's not complicated.
Right.
And here again, a lot of it's modeled. I mean, the kids saw Julie and I do without and live on a budget and not have certain things and do this and that. And so back to the more taught than taught. I think if you're modeling that, they're going to pick up on that. And so it's just.
And when they were in high school, they had to, from the time they were 15, they had to work in the summer times to support their paintball habit because we're not paying for that. And so they decided to all start a lawn service, which they made a lot of money doing that, which was a good thing. And that was how they matched for their cars, right? So the interesting thing was they were in a school where when they turned 16, their friends were getting BMWs and Mustangs. And they were at first complaining, like, we gave them a school car that couldn't do about 35 miles an hour, so they couldn't kill anybody. But down the road, they said, thank you for making us work, because once we did get the car that we had worked for, we felt so much better than just being handed stuff. And their friends ended up having to buy something much smaller once they got out on their own because they couldn't support that. So they were grateful having to learn things the hard way, which was interesting.
Yeah, I think when our oldest son went off to college, we had an account where we would put money in the account and he can draw from it when he was at school, only a limited amount. And I remember Crawford was up there visiting at the school, and there was a need that Brian had, and Crawford says, well, how come you didn't call mom and dad? And he said to dad, from the time he was little, we kept the little prayer book at a devotional at the dinner table, and would write down our prayer requests to God, and one of them was always to rely upon God to meet all of our needs. And he told his dad, which was like amazing, he said, well, Dad, I didn't tell you because it was my time to trust God for what I needed. And Crawford said, okay, that was good. But but that was a learning experience that he was listening.
Yes, yes, he was.
But we could have just put dumped some money into the account, and he could have drawn on it. Right?
Yeah.
He had a need.
Which is this is a huge point too. I think you need to teach your children that you are not their source. God is their source. We're just the resource. And to know the difference between the two. And help them to depend upon God in all things. Because there are going to come times in their lives when nobody's going to be at the end of the phone. You can't get a response. You're going to be between a rock and a hard place. Who do you trust? And I think as parents, we need to model that and don't get in God's way of teaching them a lifelong lesson of dependence upon Him. So
I love that.
That's good.
I love also the respect aspect of it. I mean, they were respectful of you not coming back, but also obviously your heart was if there was a true need. What a great balance, mutual respect in regards to the finances.
But there's another principle here. I think and we've known Russ and Julie for a long time, so I know this is the part of the signature over their children too. You want to teach your children and model gratitude to them. Gratitude. Entitlement is awful. It is a terrible thing. To appreciate whatever you have and to be open-handed and not to feed some narcissistic lifestyle down the road. And we've all seen too much of that. And so when you just freely write the check because you can, or you give them everything that they think about, or money is an expression of your guilt for not being there, all of this stuff, you fuel children who are not going to be very pleasant adults. And so you want to underscore gratitude that God meets their needs. They need to be grateful for the sacrifices people made on their behalf. You want children to honor you. But there's a difference. You'll recognize people for what they accomplish, but you only honor folks for what they sacrifice.
Wow.
And you want honor to be the end game. Yeah.
Russ, were you going to say something?
I think Crawford said it really well.
Well, okay.
Don't have anything else to add to that.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, let's talk about another transition, marriage, because we talked a lot about the parenting piece of this. But now you're sort of entering this stage where you're finding yourselves with each other with more time, a little bit of a blank slate. Now you can kind of paint a new vision together or maybe discover some old things that were put aside. What did that process look like for each of you? Russ and Julie, maybe you start us off there.
Well, I would say once I realized the kids are gone and I've got time now, finally, I made a list of things I've
nice.
wanted to do for years and didn't have time for. So it was like start sewing again because my mom and grandma sewed and I always enjoyed that, and read a magazine from cover to cover, read a book, all the way through kind of thing. And so it was kind of fun to see the things I could do now and not. So I actually went to Scripture because a lot of people said, "Are you going to go back to work now that you're?" And Russ said, "No, you need to be available to travel with me." But I wanted a verse, so I went to Titus 2, and it said, "Older women," which I was, "need to teach younger women to love their husbands, love their children, and be guards at home." So I realized that it was important for me to go ahead and start a young married women's Bible study and had a great time with them. So I've kept that going now. It's morphed into more empty nesters now, which we're all kind of at the same place. But anyway, I believe that's when we have a chance to be involved in more ministry.
Yeah, I think our kind of life words are restfully available and instantly obedient, and keeping a ministry mindset.
What was that
That's
again?
good.
Restfully available and instantly obedient. So, Julie has these young ladies. I started meeting with some guys, but I think, we've always had a ministry mindset. It was modeled to us by her parents. And so even though the kids were gone, it just took on a different form. Obviously, when the kids were there, I did senior boys, did Bible studies with them and their friends. And now it just looks different, but it still had a ministry mindset. And I think, so it changed its form, but it was still kind of similar to what we had been doing. It just was not teenage boys anymore. It was just a different focus and involved in the Sunday school class at church, things like this. So I think if you've got a ministry mindset wherever you are in your stage of life, you just keep that going. It just may change the way it looks.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you each have individual ministries. Talk about what you've kind of done together as a couple too, because I know you do couples ministry as well.
Well, that was primarily the class at the church called Life Path, where we were involved in that for a long time, just as a couple. And then out of that, couples would come over that say, being available to just let people, if they reach out. We sit with a lot of people on couches just like this and listen to them usually talk about their money stuff. And we'll get the flip chart out and we'll start asking questions and help them. We just done that recently with a couple. It was fun. They have 3 little kids with one on the way, and we went over to their house, took food over, and got the flip chart out and started asking questions and helped them with their finances. So yeah, we still do that.
Well, and now we have time. So that was the fun thing, is that we insisted that the husband and wife have to come together, not just her or not just him complain about the other. They have to come together and want help. And then we spend time with them, and then usually 3 or 6 months later. And that's been really fun because sometimes we learned a lot just really how to treat our own kids from the things that were going on with them, how older parents were using money as a weapon or a tool. So anyway, we really enjoy meeting with couples about finances because that's a felt need.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I love how your conclusion here kind of, the Titus verse was service. You're continuing to follow the Lord, blessing others. Crawford referred to it earlier, that third stage of life where you're, leaving this legacy. I mean, that's, you guys are pressing into that. You're not leaning into frivolous stuff.
Well, except pickleball.
Except pickleball. Strategic purpose.
Yeah, but it's got a ministry.
Build relationships. That's right.
It's got a ministry point.
That's right. Crawford and Karen, love to hear from you.
Yeah, I think that, so looking back, I think you're prepared for this stage in your life if you've kept the marriage first. When children get out of the third position, that's when you assign yourself to misery when they leave. Seriously, when practically speaking, it should be God, couple, then your kids, and if life is full. It's like a train ride, that you're in this train car, and you said I do, and all of a sudden life gets complicated. Kids come along, they have friends and business and career and all of this stuff. And if you've allowed yourself to take the place of the intimacy that should have been developed here, well, there's a tipping point. Kids graduate, they move, friends start moving, then all of a sudden you look at each other and you go, oh my, we don't know each other. Yeah. So I think the preparation for the empty nest comes by nurturing the relationship all the way along. Yes. And so you make the adjustment. And one of the reasons I love Russ so much, it really is because we're very similar in the sense of, I think having a personality that pushes towards, and you keep asking what's next, you live toward assignment, helps you when you have to make transitions, that you don't spend so much time grieving your loss that you can't greet your future.
Yeah.
And I find too many couples, they spend too much time grieving over, they keep talking about what used to be, what they had, and I remember this, and they can't have a conversation without nostalgia and the tears and this kind of thing. And I'm saying, well, just call the mortician. So God has assignments for us until we run through the finish line. And you might have to cut it down a little bit. Like I retired from the church in 2021, and I didn't retire because I was burnt out or because I was frustrated or anything like that. I just felt like while I had energy and time, I needed to pour myself into being a cheerleader of the next generation of Christian leaders. Somebody did it for me. And now we did have some adjustments. I had the office out of the house, and I had an office out of the house in over 40 years. And so she had visions when I take a break. She had visions for the use of my time that I didn't agree with. We had to work through that. But
it's a little different. One of the things that Crawford helped me as we were looking at launching our last one when she left the college. He says her last years of high school, we would have our dates, and of course I would want to talk about the kids, plans and all that. And he says, time out. He says, while we're on the dates, it's just us. Let's talk about us and what God has for us, and not bringing the children and all that. We'll make on the scheduled time to do that. So you have to continually be reminded that it started with just the two of you, and it's going to be the two of you again. I was involved in a professional team, and one of the things that really helped me to think this thing through is that I found out that 75% of those couples, he's a professional athlete and she's the wife, they would divorce. And the reason why they would divorce is because everything was fine, but they never depended upon intimacy together. It was always their profession. And when the profession left, then they left, they drifted apart. Yeah. Well, the drifting happened a long time. Yeah. And we as couples, we have to be careful to fight against that drifting. Yes. Because the kids are going to be gone one day. Yeah. And it's just going to be the two of you. So what are the things that together we do? We do things together, but also God has placed in my heart to be involved in ministry to women and some other things. And so that's what we do together. And then he supports me with that, and I support him. But we as a couple, it's a
She won't go with me when I play golf, though. She doesn't, she doesn't want to use the porta potties on the course. She has to go all the way back.
Yes. Yeah. I'll do miniature golf. Then.
Yeah, yes.
Oh, yeah. There you go. Well, and I would agree with that. One of the things we decided once kids came along, I don't think you realize it till the children come along, is that you have to fight to be friends so that when they leave, you're still friends. That's not something once the kids live, you start thinking, oh, we need to be friends. It's habits all the way along, Amen. Which is time for talking about finances, which is usually Sunday night. And then we would do planning weekends, which is to get away and talk about what Karen's talking about. And then it's time together, but also after the kids went to bed, it was a time to talk through the day and what are you thinking and what's coming up for you, so that you end up when the kids leave, there's not a shock there. We've been friends all the way along.
Julie's still my best friend 45 years in.
And you have to fight to do that, because especially as the high school years, you start, disagreeing with kind of how they may be doing things or how they're handling the kids, and you got to stay friends.
Yeah, Julie told me we were having so much trouble with our second born, you're the spiritual leader, you're supposed to know what to do with him. That's when I wasn't sure I wanted to be the spiritual leader.
That's right, isn't it?
So yeah, because she wanted to do one thing, I wanted. So yeah, I mean, so we had a little
Yeah, I love that friendship.
The boys created some tension in our marriage during those years, but we stayed friends.
Yeah, right. That friendship thing.
I mean, one thing I'm hearing from both of you is you were intentional as you started. There were seeds planted. You were humble. You were having active conversations, painting a vision for what your kids were to become, trying to model that. There's a lot of people that are listening probably and saying, wow, we're not doing that. Or we're in a real place of hardship, or we don't know how to deal with this. What advice would you give to them?
As long as it's breath, you can change. I mean, repentance and don't keep beating yourself up. You know, you've got to step up and say, look, I'm sorry, I did this wrong. Look, you know, I tell people, I don't know about your kids, but when our kids, especially our boys, and when they got in their early 20s, they became excessively and just tremendously insightful about our deficiencies
As parents.
That's just,
Yes.
you know, and some of it was, they were accurate. And I remember saying to one of our kids, well, they only got one problem. I said, well, what's that, Dad? Jesus didn't raise you, I did. And so, but then you apologize, you embrace that, you move on, and you have to model the apologies. And so the goal is that you want your children to remember your heart and your apologies and your willingness to change more than the sins that you committed against them. But that comes, you got to model humility and brokenness. You know, proud people don't raise balanced children. They don't. And we've had to come to grips with that. We've had to say, I'm sorry, and, you know, I mean, all of that stuff. And so you have to do. So there's always room for change.
Yeah, I appreciate what Crawford just said, because we just recently learned that there's some things we did as parents that they considered harsh, and other things. We're learning some words we never heard before. So it's like, what the heck? But I think we did, if people are listening, we didn't do this perfect by any means, but I think you start where you are, like Crawford said, and you just ask the Lord to help you, and don't be discouraged. And because your kids will see that. If you've really messed up and now you start changing, they'll see that if God's telling you to change. So start where you are. We tell people all the time on the financial side, just start where you are. You know, you just get inventory and start making some steps forward. But yeah, Crawford, I appreciate what you said. We just, our deficiencies, we're hearing some of those, now it's like, well, we think you turned out okay, but now it's like we must have been the worst parents in the world. But I think, we did the best we could. There's no manual.
No.
And,
Right. I remember we used to have family go away to a hotel, a little cheap hotel, climb into one big room and have a family time where we just says, let us have it. What's mom and dad just failing at, weaknesses and things like that. And they did. They let us know what we needed, what we were screwing up on, and which was good. And so we had this kind of all together, the six of us just talking about it, and then what can we, mom and dad, do better, things like that. So that was helpful in that too.
Takes humility to have that
Yeah,
conversation.
it was like, you have the nerve to say that to me.
Yeah.
But that was good, and it was right. Mom, you're just too crazy. You just, stuff like that.
But the only thing I was going to say is that kind of back to us being friends, we realized early on, being both pretty headstrong, we had to learn how to handle conflict with each other. And so we had a game plan for handling conflict, that if it was obvious that we're disagreeing and nobody's giving, then we had a couple of ground rules that came from Ephesians. No name calling, no yelling, no egging each other on, and that if we're still not being able to agree, that we separate and pray for 30 minutes, then come back and see if we can't work this through to where there's a solution. And that kept us from, we've done that all the way along, and that's served us well because things don't escalate.
Well, not letting the sun go down on your anger. And Ephesians 2 was another part of the ground rules. But, and I think, you just try to do these things and realize that God's, nothing's impossible with him, and he can handle it.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm still learning today.
Yeah.
We're not in control, but he is.
And I love, as I'm listening, I'm hearing, the drawing out of scripture as the basis for making your decisions, God's word, in terms of how you're going to treat one another, where it might be tempting to say, no, you're wrong, I'm going to jump on you. No, instead I'm going to honor you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah, I've heard if you don't have a Bible verse, you have an opinion.
That's a good
If we have something we can base things on scripture, you're far better off.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, couples, thank you both. Tons of gold here. I'm going to go back and listen to this myself with my wife. Really good. So thank you for your time.
Thanks for
Thank you. This is great.
Yeah.
Very honored to do this. And just want to mention to couples, if you need help, There's a great organization, Family Life. They have their Weekend to Remember, but also individual targeted resources. Is there something that you're struggling with in terms of this transition? We'd encourage you to engage with them. And of course, Blue Trust. If there's a financial issue, as Russ said, there's no blame. You just simply start where you are and build a plan to go forward, seek to honor the Lord in that way. But thank you for joining us for this session. We look forward to having you join us again for session 4, where we'll talk about the senior years or sunsetting. We look forward to having you with us. God bless you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Wisdom for Wealth for Life podcast, brought to you by Blue Trust. Thanks so much for listening, and please subscribe to wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you are seeking financial advice, please contact us at 800-987-2987. That's 800-987-2987. Or email us at info@bluetrust.com. That's info@bluetrust.com. Trust and investment management accounts and services offered by Blue Trust are not insured by the FDIC or any other federal government agency, are not deposits or other obligations of, nor guaranteed by any bank or bank affiliate, and are subject to investment risk, including possible loss of the principal amount invested. The information in these podcasts is provided for general educational purposes only. It is not intended as specific individual advice. The client's experience may not be representative of the experience of other clients, and they are also not indicative of future performance or success. Opinions expressed may not be those of Blue Trust.